Welcome to Wonderin' Wednesday, and yes, it's gonna be in the Woody. Talking Tuesday was scrapped, but guess what? There is a Ryan Day press conference, and it is going to be in person in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center today at the start of the early signing period, the new National Signing Day. And we will have full coverage of it on the podcast as always. That's Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. So, Bill, welcome back. What you wondering?
Wondering a lot. It seems like people are still in feeling a certain kind of way about the Buckeyes, and I don't really blame them. It's been not a fun December for Ohio State, but I think, and Berm can tell me if am foolishly doing so.
You are,
but like it could end up. I'm thinking it could end up being like an okay day for Ohio State, right?
It could be. It could be a very good day for Ohio State.
So like that feels like something worth, I don't know, celebrating a little bit, I guess. So I'm wondering a lot of things, but I think in the name of spreading a bit of positivity around here,
hold on now.
Yeah,
hold on.
Yeah. That's who I am. I'm Mr. Positivity. It's the season.
Now, are you accusing us of being too negative the last 2 days? Is that what's going on here, Bill?
No. Real often gets mistaken for negative. I don't think you were negative. I think you were real, which I think I would hope is appreciated, and I think it was by most people. But it's not fake. I think to celebrate what I think is a good class for Ohio State. Certainly there are holes here that need to be filled, and we'll talk about those, I'm sure, on this here episode, and certainly after we talk with Ryan Day later on today. But I think what's on my mind is, like, if Ohio State closes this thing the way that at the moment we think they will, and namely I'm thinking of like Jeremiah Smith, like, I don't know, that's a pretty big deal. Like, that's on my mind a little bit. I don't know. I would only ask Ryan Day about that, and maybe see if we can't get a potentially testy press conference off on the right foot and talk about something that's fun for a change.
Maybe with a smile.
It's so wild. Look at this. It's been 15 years since the number one ranked player in the country signed with Ohio State. Quinn Ewers did, but his whole thing got worked around, and so I don't really count that one. Since the Terrell Pryor year in 2008, the number one player in the country is on pace to sign with Ohio State in just a few hours. And people are just freaking out about all the bad stuff. And I get it, and I really do, but like, it's the number one player in the country is going to sign with Ohio State unless something weird happens in the next couple of hours. So why is that not being like screamed from the rooftops in Columbus? That's what really the genesis of the frustration that I had the last couple of days was, or at least on Monday's show yesterday.
Well, maybe they just don't want to jinx it, Berm.
I guess. I mean, I guess you can. If that's a thing, I don't know that's a real thing. It is what it is. Like, what you're up against. What I'm wondering, since this is, Wondering Wednesday, is exactly how much the lack of information regarding NFL decisions has hamstrung Ohio State in the last couple of weeks, and how much Ryan Day, who now for 2 straight signing periods has lamented the lack of guardrails in NIL, and how much, considering nothing has changed in that avenue, but from the NCAA, how much his philosophy personally feels like it needs to change or is changing, considering that those guardrails, which everyone assumed would be in place, are not and don't appear to be on the construction timeline anytime soon.
So you're wondering how much Ohio State is willing to induce and break NCAA rules. Do you expect an answer?
I'm wondering if his philosophy feels like it has to change to keep up. Like, I know no one wants to do that.
Yeah.
But do you have to do that? Because if there are no rules and there are no penalties, then why are you paying attention to rules? And how long can you survive in this world where everyone else is doing one thing and you're doing another? I want to know if his mindset is changing, or if he's so beholden to what appears to be the Gene Smith mentality that he's waiting until a new AD comes in before the Buckeyes can really say, hey, let's explore other options.
How much berm? I know you guys talked about this, so I apologize for making you repeat things, but you guys you do episodes without me, and then I get curious when I ask you questions. How much of Ohio State's roster building shortcomings, I guess, for lack of a better word, that's probably too strong of a word, are NIL related inability or unwillingness to get in the mud related, and more about like not having the proper staff in place, I guess. Like what would you attribute more of the lack of success to the former instead of the latter?
I would, only because the current staff and especially at like defensive line where I know that one of the conversations is like that coach is the same coach that was there in 2021 when JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer and Michael Hall and Tyler Williams and all these guys signed. So the sudden dip in 22, 23, 24, I mean, I know that we have conversations and lengthy ones about Larry Johnson's philosophy and how he recruits differently than most of his younger peers. But the biggest thing that's changed since 2021 is not Larry Johnson, it's NIL. So to me, at least, especially when it comes to the defensive line, when you're already recruiting a position that is almost exclusively stocked of Southern kids who you have to find other ways to get involved. You don't have a lot of them in Ohio. And you go back to the 2021 class and you had Jack Sawyer and Michael Hall in Ohio. So like that made it a lot easier. But I think that it's probably like 60-40. I don't know that it's like 80-20 in that space, but I think when you're talking about the 5-star defensive ends, when you're talking about players like Damon Wilson a year ago or Keon Keeley, like those were decisions that if all things are equal, but one thing's not, then you go where the one thing is not. And that's like, so in that way, you could just say it's all NIL, because when you're Ohio State and you're competing against Georgia and Alabama, like everything else is pretty much the same, except for, well, over here, you can get a giant stack of money. So like, I think you just go with the giant stack of money because you're still going to compete for national championships. You're still going to get developed for the NFL. And the fact that there's a grandfatherly figure in one locker room and a older brotherly figure in another, I mean, does that matter? I don't know that it really ultimately matters. What matters is like, hey, all these other factors are the same, but here I can get paid, and so can everyone in my family and everyone around me.
I do think it depends, Bill, on which part of the roster management conversation we're having, because you do have to put them in 3 separate buckets. And I would say in 2 out of the 3, NFL draft decisions and roster retention and portal conversations, whether that's additions or exits, Ohio State's doing very well with that pool of NIL money, for lack of a better term. Like the $13 million cap that Ryan Day threw out, that was more about retaining the current roster rather than recruiting inducements. And that I've never really, you guys know this, we talked about it a year ago on this day. I'm really okay with them not playing that game directly against Miami, directly against Michigan State, directly against Texas A&M. I don't believe that it is the most viable long-term strategy. Taking care of your current roster and making sure that the best players don't want to go to the NFL. Hey, sign me up to watch that version of Ohio State rather than constantly churning through freshmen or only having them for 1 year before they want to jump to the next opportunity. I'm on board with that. And I think that in this month, when we've looked about, even would have been better if they could have kept Chip Trayanum and Julian Fleming, probably, but are they worth several $100,000 for 1 more year? I'd say probably not. And I really enjoyed covering both of those guys, personality wise, on the field wise. They're great dudes, great football players, but you're going to have to make hard decisions when you're looking at the scholarship numbers. And I think if, Berm said that we still don't have like decisive decisions from everybody that's making these NFL decisions, but if that's where the NIL allocation is going, if that's where the roster management is directed, I think that's a sound strategy. And I did have to concede a point to Berm on Tuesday that if you constantly miss on 5 stars the first time, you don't get them in the pipeline, develop you, and then you don't retain them down the road, that can be a problem. And even if it's only 2 or 3 people every single year that you're losing to Georgia or Alabama, when it comes to a national championship game, that might be 12 people. So I do think that they probably have to be more aggressive or change their strategy a bit when it comes to the recruiting aspect. But a dramatic change to become a Miami or Florida State is going to create other problems in the future. And so I'm trying to have it both ways, and I know Ohio State is too.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you mostly, Austin, because it's a lot of these kids who are getting the bag as high schoolers, I think, are finding themselves disappointed with ultimately what that bag looks like anyway, and then maybe questioning a little bit like, was this really worth it? It's obviously so many high profile, freshmen going to the portal after 1 year wherever they decided to go. It's a dangerous game to play, I think, and I think I'd rather allocate my money to more veteran players. If you have to make that decision, I guess some programs don't have to make that decision, but if you're Ohio State and you do, I think that's the right way to go about it. I guess the reason I asked Berm that is because like this question is front of mind for me about like what's up on the defensive line, and it's trending in a bad way, and like there are many layers to it, but I don't even know if Ryan Day would answer it honestly, because it's a little bit delicate, but my question for him is basically what I asked Berm, like what is keeping you back here, because it's just not good enough at the moment. And like I initially thought they had been missing their number, and I guess maybe they haven't been, but because they've taken, well, this year they did, but previous couple classes they still have managed to take 4 defensive linemen, even if they weren't the 4 or 5 they originally had thought they were going to take. But I think it's a combination, Berm, of the money aspect of it, and also like I don't know that I agree that nothing has changed with Larry Johnson since the 2021 class, because I don't think the development is as strong of a selling point for Ohio State right now. Their last 5-star defensive lineman to go to the draft was a 3rd-round pick, and we're sitting here having conversations about the 2 top 10 defensive linemen they signed maybe coming back because they're not getting first-round grades after 3 years in the program. Like that's great for Ohio State if they get JT and Jack back. I'm not saying they're bad players, but that's not the plan. And I think that is a little difficult for Ohio State to continue to sell defensive line development when it's just not happening at the same clip that it was happening, 3 or 4 years ago with Larry Johnson. So I do think it's twofold. And at the moment, both of the I guess opposing forces there, the money aspect that Ohio State is struggling at times to be competitive with, and also what I consider a little bit of a dip in Larry Johnson's development chops, and the production he gets from the defensive line are both working against Ohio State to leave them in a position where they're just not recruiting as well as they need to be a championship team on the defensive line. And I felt that way for like 2 years now. And I don't know what Ryan Day feels, but it feels to me like something he cannot just let persist because he's like afraid to have an uncomfortable conversation with Larry Johnson, or doesn't want to do something that disrespects a guy who was certainly a legendary coach. But you get paid $10 million to make those kind of tough decisions, and at the moment his inability to do so, I think, is leaving Ohio State in a bad spot.
Yeah, two signees on the defensive line, provided Edric Houston signs with Eric Mensa on Wednesday. There's still an outside shot for Amaris Williams from North Carolina, who I think is basically deciding between Ohio State and Auburn, though he still remains committed to Florida in name only, I guess. The simple truth is that is being used against Ohio State on the recruiting trail. That was a major part of the conversation with Damon Wilson, was if you're not Chase Young or the Bosa's, then are you going to get to the NFL in the first round? And the argument Ohio State makes is, well, you are those guys. So those guys got there. You're those guys. And some of that, I think, is this issue on the Ohio State, like, defensive philosophy, like what they want out of their defensive ends. But I think, to go back to Austin's initial point, was you see all these young guys entering the portal, or whichever one of you said it. I don't know. There's so much conversation happening. Ohio State has a bunch of freshmen that aren't entering the transfer portal, and they didn't have all the conversations about here's all this extra money. So I think that there's an argument for Ohio State doing it the right way, but when you break down position by position, there's no doubt that things are not where they need to be, most especially at the defensive line spot. And I don't know. I mean, is it really an answer? Like, you just say, well, let's find a younger coach and everything's going to be better. Someone who's more aggressive, somebody who's more interactive with kids, somebody who's more involved on social media. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that there's a simple answer, and I don't know that saying move on from Larry Johnson is the answer, because I don't know that the next younger coach is going to be better just because he's younger. But this goes back to 2021 or 2021 with Maryland. Maryland was selling Chop Robinson, who went to Maryland before he transferred to Penn State, on this idea of, well, if you're not a Bosa or Young, you're not going to get developed by Larry Johnson. And Like that's just silly to me. I mean, like it's not really outside of regular expectation or regular thought that the best players get developed better. Like, I mean, that's the way it goes. Like that's how it goes. The better players are better players. Like that's
typically, yeah,
true. Like,
well, I mean, this is getting even way deeper into the weeds on that, but I think, those other recruiters or other players are saying, well, I mean, Zach Harrison was a 5-star, Jonathan Cooper was a 5-star, and those guys are suddenly more productive. Like, they're not high draft picks. Both have been productive. Zach Harrison, I believe, had a big play last week for Atlanta. We've seen Coop makes a bunch of big plays for Denver over his time there. But
that's where rankings are somewhat stupid, because everyone who watched Zach Harrison in high school objectively knew that he was a guy who had freaky athletic talent, but wasn't a very good football player at that time. Jonathan Cooper was a 6'3", 230-pound linebacker playing defensive end. Everyone knew that. Now, we can have a conversation about whether or not he was playing the wrong position at Ohio State, and if Larry Johnson's insistence on him playing defensive end was the reason for that, or the conversation about Baron Browning not playing defensive end because he was playing linebacker because maybe Larry Johnson didn't want him to play defensive end. Like, those are fair conversations to have. But, I mean, if people...
They just don't fit on recruiting graphics, Berm. It's too many words.
Yeah.
And then suddenly developed here rings a little hollow.
But this is the conversation.
I didn't even want to bring up Baron Browning or the fact that CJ Hicks should probably be there next year. But
yeah,
oops, right, this is the conversation. Like, those are real things. But for people to just say, well, you didn't get developed, like, Zach Harrison went from being a kid who didn't know how to play football as a freshman in college to being a 3rd-round pick. That's pretty good. Like, that's actually pretty good. But no one wants to acknowledge that he was way behind the developmental curve when he got to college, because he was ranked as a 5-star by people who looked at a 6'6", 250-pound 4-5 guy and said, well, he's definitely a 5-star, who completely ignored the fact that he didn't know how to play football.
But that nuance doesn't exist when teams are recruiting against Ohio State.
I know, but right? That's the annoying part.
Okay.
So it's up to Ohio State to be able to communicate this nuance to people, to say, actually, that's not true. And that's what they're having to do. You look at a guy like Edric Houston, who is a clear-cut 4-3 defensive end, and Alabama plays a 3-4, and it has the kid doesn't fit in their system at all, and somehow they've convinced him, well, Larry's going to retire, so you may as well just come here and play a position that's not your position. And the kid's like, yes, that sounds great. Let me sign. Like, it's stupid. I mean, you look at Keon Keeley a year ago, 6'6" kid, like, oh, you're going to be an outside linebacker. No, he's not. He's not an outside linebacker. He's going to be a defensive end. Why are we continuing this game? Tell the truth.
So I assume over the course of this press conference, we're not going to talk exclusively about the defensive line. And since we haven't had any other updates in the last couple of weeks, bowl practices have been ongoing. Any adjustments to the coaching staff have not. Those have to be next in line in some form or fashion. So which way would you go there, Bill?
Boy, I just don't know that we're going to get much in the way of information about coaching changes. It seems that Ryan Day is fairly averse to making changes until the season is over. And the season is not over until midnight on December 29th.
So all the cotton is falling from the stands.
Yeah,
all the cotton, baby.
So I suppose it could be worth asking why that's the philosophy, because it does feel a bit outdated. As things just can continue to happen earlier and earlier in college football, both the roster management and staff management, it feels like Ohio State is just kind of slow playing things in a way that puts itself at a disadvantage. But beyond that, I guess I would pivot then to the Cotton Bowl itself. And we have to ask about Devin Brown. We haven't talked to Ryan Day since Kyle McCord transferred. I'm not anticipating that he'll want to get into the details on that. But certainly it's worth asking him. But I wonder what he thinks of this opportunity for Devin Brown in a world where Ohio State has not appeared to be uber aggressive in the quarterback transfer market, a market that was frankly, I think, a little underwhelming, especially if Ohio State was going to keep it to older veteran kind of 1-year options if they were going to entertain anything at all. So how does Ryan Day now look at this as an opportunity for Devin Brown to perhaps cement himself as this team's starting quarterback heading in to 2024, because for me, I kind of feel like it is that. I mean, maybe that's putting too much on a bowl game, but like Missouri's a good team with a good defense. They were one of the better teams in the SEC this year, and I do feel like if Devin Brown goes out there and performs well and backs up some of the stuff we've heard about how well he has been practicing, then he would be putting himself in a really good position to be the quarterback of the future for this team. And it would be like an incredible kind of 180 from where he was just a couple of months ago. But I'm wondering if Ryan Day views it the same way, or if it's just more of like, oh, these are the guys we have on hand. We're going to go out there and play, and then we'll reassess everything after the fact.
I think the way that he handled the Kyle McCord situation with not guaranteeing anything when it comes to 2024 will probably that should apply to Devin Brown as well, right? And I think that part of that needs to be in fairness to Devin Brown, because he may well go out there in a week and a half and light the world on fire and run all over the place and make plays out of structure and beat Missouri. And if that happens, great. I mean, that certainly changes the conversation heading into March and April of next year. But if you don't have Marv, if you don't have Julian Fleming, if you don't have Cade Stover, if your backfield is depleted, we don't know still what Travion Henderson's going to do, but we know that two of those other guys that were a key part of the rotation are gone. That's not really a very advantageous situation. And that shouldn't be held against him either for a conversation with Lincoln Keenholz or potentially Aaron Noland in March or April. So I do think like we have to ask it. Like, what's the evaluation? How does the situation change? What does it mean for Devin Brown? But I do want to like temper some of it. If it's off the charts, good, great. But if it looks rough, are people going to be okay with like not making a massive sweeping assessment of that? Because I don't think that would be fair to Devin Brown or Ryan Day or anybody else involved. So that I'm curious, just like you, about what Ryan Day will say about that opportunity.
I think it's these conversations that are going to be asked about on Wednesday that are the reason Ryan Day should have had a press conference a week ago when all the players had a conversation, so that those things could have been asked about then. And so that signing day can be about recruiting, because I think one of the reluctances that people have and maybe one of the reasons why the in-person press conference was being toyed with, or the idea of having it toyed with, is because this day is supposed to be about recruiting, and it's going to end up being about, are you willing to fire a coach 3 days before Christmas? And I think that like, I think that I can understand why maybe you don't want to have those conversations right now. Like, you get 2 days with your family and you're going to be asked about whether or not you're going to ruin Christmas for a little girl somewhere, like,
Jeez.
It's kind of messed up. Like, if we were going into this press conference and people are saying, hey, tell us about Sam Williams-Dixon and how he played when he transferred to Pickerington North, like, I think Ryan Day and the coaches would be more inclined to be like, hell yeah, let's do this. Let's celebrate. But because there's been so little conversation with the coaches since the end of the regular season, people have all these other things that they're dying to, extrapolate, and it turns into something that's other than a signing day press conference.
Well, Berm, that was the whole point of our conversation earlier in the week about missed opportunities.
I know. I'm just saying, like, I can see now why I can understand maybe why he doesn't want to do it.
But that's fine. But that is also why the NIL bag was dropped off for Ryan Day to the tune of $10 million, is to handle those difficult conversations. And I don't want to do this inside baseball thing again, but I would not have just been upset if the signing day should be a celebration. But if we had already had a press conference to talk about transfer portal movement, Kyle McCord, coaching staff, I would have said, you know what? It's a unique year. The players left on Tuesday to go home to see their families. They have to go to Dallas on Friday to spend Christmas away from, everybody else getting ready for a bowl game on the 29th. It's a unique window. Next year, they'll go back to a normal signing day press conference and celebrate like crazy, and everything will be fine again. And I would have said, yeah, I get it. Thumbs up. But the lack of it,
this is all, it's all encompassing. Like, it goes back to, this should have happened a week ago.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I'd love to ask any questions.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the day's about. I want to know about the process of making the shift from the Dylan Raiola recruitment, to how they settled on Aaron Noland and what they saw. Like these are important things in the recruiting space that need to be broken down and sorted out, because there has to be content for the next 3 months. I do want people to. I hope people are going to ask about recruiting. That's what I'm saying, because I think that a Wednesday press conference 5 days before Christmas should be fun and celebratory.
I think next week. So the coaches are scheduled, I believe, for a press conference the day before the Cotton Bowl. The three of us should just go in there, grab the microphone, and turn that into the recruiting press conference. Because there won't be anything to know about the Cotton Bowl itself. So then we'll just take it over. We won't give the mic to anybody else. Like, hey, you asked all those coaching questions last week, Austin. Let's talk about Jeremiah Smith some more. That's what we should do.
That'd be fun. I want to ask Eli Drinkwitz about Jeremiah Smith.
How close they were. Well, you could ask him about Jeremiah McClellan.
Jeremiah McClellan.
Oh, yes. I got in there before Berm on a recruit. Yeah.
Hey,
what else are you thinking about that you want to piss off Ryan Day by asking about on Wednesday?
No, I do have a recruiting question I want to ask, and I don't necessarily mean it to come off as negative, although I suppose it could be construed that way.
I mean, you were the guy that started this entire podcast by saying, hey, you wanted to be positive.
Yeah. And then, because I knew what I wanted to say later, so I wanted to make sure that I said at least one positive thing. Of the 4 offensive linemen in this class, like, there's a tackle, right? There's definitely at least one tackle of Ian Moore, Gabe Van Sickle, and the 2 Armstrong twins. There's 2 tackles? Okay. Because it's a little confusing if you look around, like Van Sickle and Ian Moore, like I think on 247 are interior offensive linemen, and then I think on Rivals they're tackles, and like I realize that those lines get a little blurred with high school players, so I'm not trying to read too much into it, but I guess like in Ohio State's eyes, I'm wondering how many tackles they think they got in this class.
I mean, you saw Ian Moore in person at camp over the summer. I mean, I think he's a tackle. I think he can play guard, but the goal is to start him at tackle. And Deontay Armstrong, the taller of the 2 twins from Lakewood St. Edward, he's a tackle. So now Ian Moore is probably like a redshirt freshman playing time type of tackle, where Deontay Armstrong may be a redshirt sophomore type of playing time, because he's still got to gain weight. I mean, if you saw photos of him with like Ben Roebuck, the Michigan commit, on Twitter a week ago, like Deontay still looks like a defensive end at this point.
I think he's a running back.
Yeah. I mean, he certainly, but
he looks like Jelani Thurman.
So look, he needs to gain like 10 pounds to get to Jelani size, but he's going to be a tackle. And then you got Devontae and Gabe Van Sickle, who are more of your interior guys. And you also have to think about it from the perspective of, even though they're not freshmen, you signed 4 offensive linemen a year ago that none of them played really, except for Luke Montgomery. So you have 8 freshmen on the offensive line next year. So it's not quite as like scary, I think, as people want it to be when you look at it from that way. And you may be able to get Enoch Vamahi back. Like, there's other things that can happen here. And then you get Fryer and Josh Simmons back, and you get Donovan Jones back. And so like the offensive line, I think, is in pretty good shape. And it does allow you to have a couple of years of developing Ian Moore, who's a legit 6'6" and 315 pounds, like, to be a true tackle, which I think he is.
Yeah, I thought so too. To your point, when I saw him in the summer, I thought, like, when they first signed him, I was like, I don't know. And then I saw him in the summer, I was like, yep, he's a tackle. So I'm there with you.
It does feel like we spent a lot of last offseason and a lot of the signing day talking about what the future of the offensive line looked like. And it certainly was rough at times for Ohio State in September and October. They built a little momentum late, but man, if you keep 4 of those 5 back, which it certainly looks like is going to happen for Ohio State, and Enoch Vamahi could provide veteran depth potentially. Who knows what will shake out there? But then this next wave, 4 and 4 behind that. I mean, the pictures change pretty quickly. I think, maybe there's not like an insane amount of 5 stars, like every single one across the board, or top 10 national recruits, but it feels like Justin Fry has really stabilized the position overall and got it at a spot where we shouldn't have to ask these questions in the years coming ahead for Ohio State on the offensive line. Now, you have to do that work every single year, of course, but it does feel like that doesn't have to. Bill can relax. Like, he doesn't have to have a bunch of offensive line hand rigging at this point.
Yeah, but I mean, you do look at it, and I think there's a tendency from people to downplay the additions of kids from in-state, or downplay the additions of players that maybe their recruitment, like Ian Moore, wasn't a big thing because he knew where he wanted to go and did it early. And obviously, you take with a grain of salt a little bit what you hear from the Ohio State side, but they love Josh Padilla as the next center at Ohio State after Carson Hinsman. They love what Austin Sareveld is doing as one of the next wave of guards. Luke Montgomery's athleticism, they think he can play anywhere on the line. Like you've got dudes there. Now people want that, true 5-star offensive tackle, that Jordan Seaton type. But you also, when you do that, when you get that sort of player, you also go through and bring with it the drama that comes along with everything we've been talking about throughout this show. Jordan Seaton committed to Oregon or to Colorado a week ago, and on his Twitter feed on Tuesday has like the uncertainty, what button to press. He's removed all of his Colorado stuff from his Instagram profile, like all the stuff that the normal signs of concern. Like you're like, wow, that's been a week, and like, is this what you want? And yeah. I think especially at a position that has always been a developmental position, you should not be counting on freshmen to come in and play on the offensive line. I would much rather recruit a third-year offensive tackle from college than a first-year freshman offensive tackle from high school. And, I know that the Buckeyes are not always going to be the most proactive in the portal because they do believe in developing from within, but at offensive tackle, I'm telling you, there's not a high school tackle they would have found last year other than Caden Proctor who could have done what Josh
Jimmy
Simmons. Josh Simmons did for Ohio State this year. So it turned out okay,
Yeah, I think my thing with the offensive line is, are they just bringing in enough guys who can actually play here? I think there were a couple of years where they were just trying to meet a number, and then in the effort to do that, just took too many guys who were just probably not the right quality of player, and that's a really hard evaluation too. As like we've talked about before, like there's a lot of 3-star guys in the Midwest, and some are going to become first-round picks, and some are going to like never play at a place like Ohio State. You got to make sure you're getting the right ones more often than not. So that's the charge, I think, for Justin Fry in my mind, more than it is landing a Jordan Seaton every cycle, which makes it hard to evaluate because you got to wait like 3 years to see if he was right.
Yeah, you'd love to have one of those guys in Ohio every 4 years, like Bears Johnson, right? Like that.
And isn't there one? Like
a couple in the class of 2026 that are shaping up to be that way. The 2025 class with Carter Lowe in Ohio, and there's players that are coming through the pipeline. The Ohio talent that's coming down the road is much better in the next 3 years than it's been the previous 3, and that's positive. But I was thinking about, like, for content purposes, do you think we should just plan a show in Dallas where we have Bill apologize to Josh Simmons for like 25 minutes? Just like
I would do that.
I would hope that Josh Simmons would be available to be part of that, and we haven't talked to him in months. So
we could patch Doug in and let Josh just tee off on Doug for.
Yeah, I do want to be clear. Doug was much meaner to Josh Simmons.
Yeah, I just think maybe maybe as part of our Festivus for the rest of us in the airing of grievances, maybe we should let the players who we may be pissed off take some shots back.
Do you think he already pissed off Josh Simmons? There's no way he listens to our show. I know Josh Fryer does.
Yeah, but Bill already said he was wrong about him last week on the updated Stonk Watch.
Yeah, he said it once, though. I'm going to need many more concessions, but mostly from Doug. Well, we'll let Doug continue to heal up, and then we can attack him for that.
That's a conversation for another day. Wednesday, the start of the early signing period, is about the class of 2024. So hopefully Berm gets his fill of that recruiting talk, and we can maybe get some other things to break down later in the afternoon on some snap judgments. Thanks for starting off your Wednesday with us, with finding out what we're wondering. Hopefully it's the same stuff you're wondering about the Buckeyes as we get an update ahead of the Cotton Bowl next week. For Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham, I'm Austin Ward. Thanks again. We'll talk to you later.